All right. Good evening. We're calling to order the Newari Needham Unite Against Racism Working Group meeting of June 12th. We're all here sort of eating dinner collectively, and we have some of our members online. We have both Jen and Marcus online. So we're a little mixed, and we'll be rearranging some food in a moment, hopefully, and getting Natasha some.
I'm like looking at the pizza, but
I'm just looking at the pizza.
You go by hand, so grab a
I
piece.
should just grab.
I think we're still expecting Jay at some point this evening.
Liz is sick.
Liz is sick, Ramen. We'll have to ask Miles if he heard from Ramen, because I thought he had heard from everybody. Okay, so here we go. Hello to everybody. So the select board has continued to work on a variety of initiatives that were laid out by Newari over the course of the last year. When we last met a year ago, we agreed that we wanted to continue to convene this group at least annually to check in as a collective about the progress that the town was making and to consult about goals for the upcoming year and what the next priorities need to be. So this is our meeting to do that. And I'm appreciative of everybody taking their time on what's still a nice summer evening before it gets to raining, which I think we have in our near future, to talk about that because it is important work. Maybe if we're going to start with updates. And Kate and Katie are both still eating, of course.
Okay.
But the first update on our list is in fact about the staff training that has been going on this year. That was one of the select board goals and the town goals to work on training town managers in cultural competence and bias related issues. So let me turn it over to you guys.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Marianne. So our training for staff, I'd put into two buckets. We did training opportunities for all staff. And we had Rachel Glisper, who was our former HR director. She now does diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging training and support for a lot of municipalities and some other HR functions as well. And so we offered a series of opportunities for all staff, and we tried to work really operationally, make sure if you're in public works, you could participate, if you're in the health department, et cetera. But some of the topics were building inclusive work community, working across 5 generations, which comes up quite a bit in town. There are 5 generations in the workforce. We had one on microaggressions, and they just ended the series last week with potluck with food from a variety of cultures and bringing staff together, kind of less around education and training, but more around celebrating different cultures in town and bringing staff together that normally might not come together. And then I think we had talked the last time this group met that we were launching a series of training for our leadership team. Leadership is the top 2 staff people in every department and division across town. And so we did a 5-part training series, 2 hours each session with trainers from William James College, their Center for Behavioral Health, Equity, and Leadership. And those conversations and trainings were everything from kind of basic understanding of DEI language and principles. We talked quite a bit about people's personal experiences and what lens they bring to the work and how they think about inclusion from the town as an organization. We talked about your sphere of influence. We talked about culturally responsive continuum and where are you and how do you apply that to what either individual interaction to a policy or a program or shaping an entire system or shaping an entire community. The last session culminated in working through, folks had homework to work through and creating their own individual action plan. And we do our performance evaluations on the fiscal year, so we're heading into FY 24, and every department manager has to have a DEI related goal as part of their work for the year ahead. So those are kind of coming together between our department managers and their bosses in our formation of their goals for FY 24. But I would say not just the hard skills of how do you have a SMART goal and how do you think through what's in your ability to really make an impact. That was all very positive. It gave folks some hard skills, but I'd say more importantly, when we started it, I guess I'd speak for myself. I was not sure how the conversations were going to go because we have folks who were like, what is DEIB? What are we talking about? To other folks that are like, we need to be doing way more than we're doing, faster than what we're doing, and everything in between. So for me, the best part was one, the trainers that we chose were excellent, really good facilitators, really good kind of working with a group that in and of ourselves are on a continuum. And second, just a real open, honest discussion amongst folks that I think helped people shape their goals and think about what they could do to make an impact in their department, but also just helped us build our team and have people talk openly about diversity challenges, either that they've experienced in their personal lives or professionally, how they were struggling with. What's the best goal to pick? You know, how do I know how to measure that? How do I know that I'm making an impact? So that was really our work largely for staff training in FY 23. And right now we are in planning mode for FY 24. What's the next phase of this? I guess the last thing I'd say is that in fiscal year 22, we had gotten funding from the state operating budget with the help of our state rep and senator to support DEI work. This current FY 23 that we're just wrapping up was the first time that we had operating money in the town budget. And so that $50,000 supported all of the training that I just talked about, and it would not have been possible without it. So for the FY 24 budget, we have that $50,000 again. And so we're thinking through, you know, the best way to utilize those resources to keep it going.
Katie, did all of the staff with the training?
The intensive one was leadership, which is the top 2 people in each department. So the department manager and their assistant.
And the other training was?
The other trainings were all open to all staff.
Open to staff.
Yeah.
Marcus is his hand up. Marcus?
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Katie. I just had a quick question about if there were any examples of some of the goals that were given or anything that you know off the top of your head, and you know, were we successful as far as the leaders in those specific areas in accomplishing those DI goals that they gave themselves, and you know what that was like?
Yeah, so the goals, they really range, and I'd say so most are in formation to be finalized for this upcoming year. Some range from offering trainings for their staff, since now that they're trained, they want to offer opportunities for their staff. Others were translating communications more consistently, diversity, a focus of recruitment and retention of diverse staff. I'm trying to think of other examples. We had a good conversation about a lot of folks feeling like opening up clarity around town processes and where community can have input was foundationally an equity issue. And so being more proactive about how do we communicate town, you know, how the community can engage in town policies and practices. So those are just a couple of ideas, but
And so right now, so the accountability comes from your group, the leadership comes from us. Yeah. And would you ever consider having someone help you with that or consult with you?
So the board set a goal to evaluate it, and we put it into next year, so we're taking a look at that. Experience in communities has been mixed, and it's just so important on having the right access and the right structure in place. The one thing, and so we're definitely open to looking at it. The one thing that we don't want to lose is this notion that everybody's responsible for DEI belonging, so that's one of the concerns some of our colleagues have said is that the department managers say, well, give it to that person and they'll take care of it, and if they don't own it, so these are the things that we're gonna be valuing.
Marcus, how well can you hear online? I'm just worried in this room. You're okay? Good.
Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to mention under the staff training, or maybe it's other before we get to focus groups, is I handed out this DEI initiatives document, and I had sent it to you in November when Chuck Murphy-Ramblody, our HR director, presented to the select board. But it's a really good summary of what we've been working on. He gave some samples of the goals that managers have implemented last year, for example, outreaching to trades, vocational and agricultural schools to recruit summer employees, implementing succession planning to promote people. And many of these are solidly in place in some of our departments. So that's helpful. And then really very much focused on trying to get a handle on the data. We have a voluntary self-identification form that we sent around to existing employees, and we got, I don't know, I think we have a good start, but all new employees fill it out. So we're having a much better ability to track the status of our employees and how well we're doing in recruiting people of all backgrounds. So that's something that they've been working on with respect to the data. We're also looking at new staff or assisting staff who are leaving. And one of the things that we've been trying to figure out a better way to do is trying to find out why our candidate pools aren't as diverse as we want. So that's a goal that we're looking at for next year. And also people who don't take the jobs, why are they not taking them when we offer them to them? So that we're working on some of those things. And we are looking at some of the metrics. Miriam, you sent it to me. I don't remember where it came from, but it was sort of like, look at opportunities for training and things like that, ways to look at your inside operation. And if certain, if by race category or gender, there's a disparity in terms of people who are actually going to training, we have to figure out whether that's because of the job they're doing or whether that people are taking an interest or whether we're not being offered. So those are some of the things that Chuck has on his goal list for next year.
I had sent Kate a document, and I also don't remember what the source was. But what I said to her is these were actually the first set of diversity metrics that made sense to me as really tangible things that could be measured in the organization that we could track over time. And that would be actionable, something that we could actually act on. Maybe we can share it with the group just so they can see those questions, but I suggested they might be a good basis for a dashboard for this work that we're doing.
And I know that the personnel board supported the articles for town meeting with respect to utilizing, search firms.
Oh, yeah.
So temporary staff,
Right.
to fill positions that we're not looking to fill.
Which is important when so many people are looking to fill positions these days. So
And sometimes when you have somebody in a temporary role, it ends up being something that works into a full-time hire.
right, that happens too. Good. Any other questions relating to the staff training piece and next steps? Natasha?
I have a question. How large is the staff? Just there are percentages here, but how many people are in staff?
This is just townwide, our town side, 375.
Yeah, so that's important to recognize. The schools do their own programming. And at this point, there hasn't been a decision to look at some issues together or to cross train. So we are focused right now on town employees.
It seems like it's a little better for managers, but you're 25% female versus 75% male for non-managers. So I'm trying to figure out, is it the role of the positions? Yeah, because it's DPW and facilities and things like that.
Yeah, many of our departments are historically male. So in fire, we have a female firefighter for the first time ever.
Right.
So that's, you know, of the 375, that's 75, right? And then police were doing much better. We have, I think, 8 or 9 women in the police department. There's 50 of them. In Public Works, we're doing pretty well, but there's 150 of them. So it's just, you know, in very male dominated fields in Public Works. So, but
You're doing
I would-
better
I
than
would add-
managers.
That in the reverse, the library is vastly predominantly female. So it is,
as
you
is
know,
HHS.
we're part of these, you know, broader trends of
Yep.
professions.
Yep.
But it is something that we talk to our managers about is what is diversity for your department? Because it's not the same.
It's right.
For
It needs,
everyone.
right.
You're exactly right.
It's based on the pipeline of those careers.
And like, what's the group look like and who's
Right.
missing?
And do they all feel they belong?
Right.
Any other questions? I'll be interested to hear what the answer after the
Hear something from you today that might spark. I'm sorry. We hope to hear something from you that will also help us with.
So again, this is a presentation that we saw this past year in November. I would expect that it will be a presentation that the board will be updated on. Yep. So we'll come back to that, just like we are with the various police reporting that's going on that comes back at a regular interval. Yep. That we still haven't gotten to Marcus's quarterly or monthly. Our goal is to get it to issuing the police report biannually. Is that what I mean? That's what I always hesitate over. Did I just say every 2 years or every 6 months? I'm hoping every 6 months that we can get to taking a look at that and figuring out, in fact, what's meaningful and what's not. Because I think there's a lot of data in the police report that may not be telling us as much. You know, we'll figure out what actually tells us something, but. Okay. All right. One of the other initiatives that we had discussed was working on some focus groups to talk with folks who are living in Needham, communities of color, and understand some more about their lived experiences. So I think we started with trying to figure out where we could get the data, but let me turn it over to you.
I'll
to
kick
talk
it
about
off,
where
and
we
then
are.
Vivian and Marcus are the subcommittee on this. So the specific focus group that the select board decided to focus on is residents or members of the community, Black residents, and not make it too broad. So we have engaged a facilitator who's also a member of the body. And Marcus has been recruiting folks to come and bring their friends. And so we were hoping for June, but I think we're not at June now. So we have to decide whether, because Marcus is working on the best location, because this is a non-town. It's not going to be in town. It's not going to be, you know, held in a public building. So Marcus, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's probably been the recruitment has gone well. So secured people, you know, some that are in the room, some that are not in the room, other, you know, whether business owners or just town residents, professors. We have a pretty healthy mix of people that are willing to do it. Now it's just finding the venue. So what I'm thinking and what I'm doing, I had a great conversation with someone today about going to check out a space tomorrow after the select board meeting. So just going to take a look at it. It's more of a public place. So it's just trying to understand, do we want something more, you know, isolated or, you know, public, just to have some just unique and intentional conversations, you know, about, you know, who we are as a town, how people are feeling as a town, and having that. So I should have a better understanding, and she's going to send me an email with possible dates and what's going on as far as if they have music or, you know, what Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I think are better days for that specific place. And I know Vivian might have had a spot as well. So I would say hopefully by the end of the week, I'll have those dates and I'll send them over, and we can get something started with the doodle, and then try to figure out dates. I had her look at June, July, and August. So I don't know exactly when we're going to have it, but the goal is to have it, whether before the fall to have that first initial meeting. I would like to have more than that. The things have gotten away. End of school craziness for me has gotten away, but I'm excited with the potential and where we can go. From the people that I talked to seem really interested in having a voice in this and bringing along at least one other person to do that as well.
Thank you. One of the things that we drafted a pre-survey that Vivian and Marcus are going over, but one of the ideas that we proposed, and I don't know if that's where they'll land, but there are a number of DEI questions, Nuari related questions that we had talked about on the citizen survey that we did. And we thought it would be, because the Black population response rate is so small because of the numbers, we thought it might be useful to use those same questions to see if the data that's been provided by our consultant matches up to what people are feeling, who you're going to see. So,
Yeah. When we were having conversations about these focus groups, I do facilitation for a living, but I offered my services on a pro bono basis because Marcus assured me, and as did others, that I could be seen as creating a trusting and safe space for people to share their stories and their thoughts in a very confidential way, without attribution, so that we could get the information and the feedback that is desired for URE purposes, while also honoring the challenges for people who would be interested in participating. And so the intent is that all of the information that is going to be shared will be shared only with me and with Marcus, as a community member, not as a URA member, not as a select board member, but strictly as a community member himself. And that the feedback will be anonymized and consolidated and provided back to the town. So those are the parameters, which is why, Marcus and I need, again, as community members, to review the survey, to think about the topical prompts that will happen in these conversations. And so I appreciate your suggestion and the reminder of what is in there from the consultant, so that we can think about what needs to be discussed. So, any questions about that, Marcus, or did I speak accurately?
Absolutely. And all valid, all true. And yeah, I think it's going to be really important when you're trying to create an environment of people to be vulnerable, to have someone that they feel like they can be that with without, like you said, any judgment, any hesitation. And, we may get that the first meeting, we may not. But I think we have a lot of people coming to the table that have really amazing, thoughts and shared and lived experiences that we're gonna, as a town, start, to get more perspectives and ideas and suggestions on things that we want to, make better about our town, and how we talked about, making that mission statement kind of our fabric, and not what we do, but who we are as a town. And it's going to take a lot of time, but it's happening, and things have happened. And I'm just staying, cautiously optimistic about how this goes.
And I'm looking at them as less of a focus group and more of a conversation circle, right, where there is some sharing of lived experiences and ideas and thoughts about the future. Again, all within the construct of being a resident or business owner or somebody who has a connection to this community.
the Nuari goal is to make Needham as welcoming as possible, and we just need all voices, starting here, to help us figure out what that is, and where we may be not meeting that mark, so we can.
And letting the participants contribute to the overall goal of being an agent of change. Right? But you have to identify where's the desire for change, what is the what is involved, what are the hopes, what are their thoughts about the vision, what are their concerns,
all that. But again, creating a safe space for that conversation. And then what is the outcome of it? Will you be documenting generalizations, or how does that translate into change? In some sort of feedback report, and I don't know what that'll look like until I gather the context. Right, but I think the idea is to say, how does this feedback, how does this conversation, how do these ideas, how do these concerns fit in with not only what URI is doing, but what the town has been charged with in terms of executing the vision.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And then also I would say once that feedback and those things are then brought to, Katie, the select board, then, overall, I feel like right now it's the select boards, the accountability piece, and then hold that. So once these are made, once these are, documented, shared, and then the process, coming up with a timeline and a purpose and intentionality behind turning these thoughts and ideas and these experiences into real substantial change that we can help implement and help, I would say, kind of see into action forward from them. But it's going to start with just getting this information and then, analyzing it and then understanding it and presenting it in a way that where changes can be made. And if they're not, in a way that we feel like is beneficial for the town, then that's a conversation that we have about what would that follow-up, what would that accountability piece be? And starting the conversation is a good start.
I also think that, there's the larger picture too, which is that, this is not resting on URA, this is not resting on the town, it's also resting on all of the community groups, all of the organizations in town and the partnership, being thought partners about it. And so I think this will inform perhaps the town's plan on what it wants to do, which may include how to engage with different segments of the community, which have, perhaps their own specific interests, but there is always common ground in that.
That was one of the things I was thinking about it is I think it would be a mistake to presume that all of these issues are necessarily the same issues that we find in other areas. So, but it's important as a first step. Right. To certainly do that.
And I don't know that we've identified all of the other groups.
I think that's true.
Conversation circles may make sense.
Yeah.
So we need to start somewhere.
And I wanted to add that so I'm designing a cultural center for the Puerto Rican community in Boston. And I went to a fundraiser last week and I met the woman who's in charge of Latinas in Needham, who has been emailing me for 10 years and I've never met her because and I said to her, so anyway, she said, I said, we tried to connect with you last year through, communications, I don't know, but through Cindy. But and she's like, oh, please get in touch with me. I'd love to, participate and get the group together. And so that's why I was asking what the mission was and how you were gonna do that, because I could do that with that group. To hear from them and to see, kind of get feedback, since the one who sends out all the emails and the one who communicates with everyone was super enthusiastic about it. So that would be another way of getting more information, but I wanted to see how you were documenting it and all of that, because I would volunteer to get the group together. And get additional information. It can't hurt, right?
Yes, I think once we have the first one, that'll help us set the foundation for doing other groups. Will be a really good idea.
But Marcus and I are gonna get cracking.
That sounds good. Any other questions or thoughts? Key questions we would like to know?
And you can share your thoughts offline with me. Again, I'm not doing this because of my role with Mari or any other role in town. I'm doing this community.
Okay, thank you, guys. We look forward to hearing about it. Hope that it's successful in recruiting everybody. Oh, I meant, did I bring in? I brought my bulletin from St. Joe's, so Father Michael Fumo has just arrived at St. Joe's. And he is an African priest who came to the Boston Archdiocese to go to seminary and then has stayed in Boston. So he's been in Boston, I think, for the last decade, but he's just come to Needham. So I don't know if he might be an interesting person for you to connect with as well. Okay. Any other updates that we need to cover? I know we invited everybody every time we had the police come to the select board. Hopefully you got a chance to look at some of their materials, but they have continued to work on the goals that were set out for them following the incident in Needham, and that they set for ways to develop the force and to broaden their participation. And of course, as the town has moved forward, we've eliminated civil service. We're putting the new systems all in place to hopefully recruit or create a broader pool, at least, to recruit from, to create some more opportunities for citizens of every type of background to be able to connect with the police force and continue to work on their training. Also, I think people have seen a lot of things recently, the work that they're doing related to mental health and the training in that area and various initiatives that they've been supporting around some of those issues as well in the community. But I'll open it up for any other updates or questions that people might want to ask about or raise related to the town work over the last year.
I have a question about, and I should know this because I was on PPBC when we were doing the stations, but do we have scenario rooms in the new police station? Or Milo machines and everything for de-escalation and all of that?
Yeah, they're all hard to do.
And where do they get trained?
We have the
State police?
so if they, I don't have a for sure answer that they do go to in service through the Mass Criminal Justice Training Council, and we also do our own training. So I can find out, but I know that they do.
I'm doing a study for Boston Police Department for their academy. So I went to Washington DC to look at the national so I've been understanding all the different things that have been changing, and the biggest thing is training, like de-escalation training through simulation. And so I mean, I'm sure I know we have a lot of spaces in there. I didn't know if we had Milo machines or,
So when we did the Citizens Academy, we had.
Sure.
I forgot to do your own personal experience. You don't have to.
No, I'm happy to. So, yeah, the Needham Police does have Milo. So this is like simulation software where you're in the room interacting in a real life situation. So we do it in-house, but when the police department did the Citizens Academy, I sat in on as many sessions as I could, and they had us do it.
Yeah.
And I can say that fully knowing that it was a simulation and you're just in a conference room, my heart rate shot up.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. And so just even that little glimmer into what their experience was like and how they worked through it was fascinating. But the trainer who's on staff walked through after what you did well, even with me as a volunteer, participant, what you did well, what you should have done differently, and then talk through, well, how did you feel and what made you hesitate or react too quickly, and kind of work through it. So it was really eye-opening for me.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's really hard right now to recruit women, but it's really hard to recruit anyone.
Yes.
Because everyone's competing. So Boston Police Department used to only have 120 recruits. Now they're striving for 220. So they're taking from towns. So there's this whole thing that's going on. One of the things, and I'll be quiet about this after, but one of the things that was really interesting about the national is that they incentivize students to go to community college for 2 years and then go into the program. So it's kind of like a farm league a little bit, because it allows them to learn about things that they normally wouldn't, so that they can be better prepared to be able to deal with some of the difficult situations that are happening now, rather than coming, straight in without an education. So there was a lot going on. We were asking, like, what has changed in the past 5 years? What has, so.
We're certainly seeing a big change where virtually everyone we hire has a bachelor's degree or higher. So it's very different than even 20 years ago. We did have quite a few people coming out of the military, which I know is in the city of Boston a lot, but it's less. Yeah, those are different challenges.
There was an interesting article in the Commonwealth. Did you read the Commonwealth article this week about maybe it's time to rethink police recruiting and some changes, and, saying, recognizing that there is currently an absolute veterans preference, but in fact, so much of the work now is changed, and they're advertising using your weapons and your special cars and blah, blah, blah. But in fact, the real work is more human to human work. Maybe we actually want people to go take a year and do a service program before they come into this. It was really an interesting kind of idea that it's got to be a blend of both that you bring to it. That you need the competence as it relates to everything involved in keeping people safe. And that's a lot of different skills. So
I would just add that in the police contract, that most recently with the exiting civil service, there was also an expansion of degrees, and so this is not just hypothetical, like this is an active conversation that we have with the police union here, that sociology, psychology, social work, these are things that are valued and that you will get paid accordingly for, as opposed to just it being criminal justice, et cetera. So I think it's a chicken or an egg thing too, to kind of put value on the training and skill sets that you want to see.
I do want to let people know that somewhere during our focus group discussion, I did have a text from Jay that said he is stuck at French press, still cooking for things that are due for tomorrow. So, so he regrets not being here, but he is cooking away. I'm glad his business is good. And
Jen's out of the car.
Jen made it from Boston. Yeah. So, all right. The next item we had, if there's not other thoughts, Jen, do you have any thoughts or other questions you want to ask about related to the town's work over the last year?
No, I do not. It sounded really great.
All right, then we,
I can get a question about the dashboard piece we're doing. Did they ever develop that, or to see
The
types
police
of,
dashboard?
to sort of review what the change has been and sort of the level of, commitment, like what people are getting charged with and the ethnicity and
Yes, they've done 2 years, 2 full years now. We've been talking to them about trying to do some shorter intervals, but I can send the link around to the two that we have done. It's the calendar 22 and calendar 21 data for motor vehicle stops, arrests, all those by race and gender, and resident, non-resident status.
and that is on their webpage too, so it's also publicly accessible, but. So we have to come in and go through the whole thing with the board, and as I keep saying, Marcus would really like us to do it more frequently. We're trying to get to that. They did hire the analyst, so they do have an analyst who can pull that data together, and given that they're now doing it regularly, they've worked to get the systems in place that actually can make producing it more straightforward as well. All right, we had on our list to just go through and review the committee charge. I just think it's worthwhile to check in and see if we think it's still appropriate. And if there's anything that we would tweak or change. The first item, articulating a recommended vision for racial equality in Needham and guiding principles that will inform future actions. We still have those, and I know I've come back to them several times this year, as have other people. So that was the work that this group did over the first, predominantly our entire first year. Second, establishing protocols and practices for getting community feedback with a specific focus on engaging Black, Indigenous, and people of color and others who have been marginalized due to their race or ethnicity. I think a couple of things have happened. So this was one of the outcomes of this was this discussion that led to the focus groups or the community conversations that Vivian and Marcus are working on to get started at this point with one particular group. We've also, over the course of the past year, worked with the Human Rights Commission to set up their process for being able to hear complaints and understand or concerns and understand what those might be and if there's any resolution, or at least categorize those so that that kind of feedback can come back to the select board and to this committee in a anonymized way that doesn't put people's identities at risk. Has been another aspect there that's been worked on this year.
And we had the custom questions in the biannual citizen survey.
So we added 2 questions free to that particular survey relating to this topic. So then we can start to build trends there.
And Marianne, did you get any feedback from people? Did you get anonymous feedback?
On the citizen survey, I would have said we didn't see anything in the anonymous feedback there that rose to a level that's actionable. Is that a fair statement, Kate?
We created a PowerPoint that just showed the only data they have that the company can use is white and non-white. But some of them were actually kind of remarkable. But vast majority of them were in the statistical range. What's the word? Statistically significant. Most of them, the differences weren't statistically significant. So it was interesting. But I can send that along too, because I think it's really interesting.
What was the response rate? So they always go out to enough people to get a statistically significant survey.
It's an excellent response rate, but I don't want to speak out of turn. So, but I'm really blowing it. Katie, you'll know. There's something you do with statistical data to manipulate it so that it represents the whole, you know,
An extrapolation.
whatever. Sorry. So even though the non-white population is fairly low, so they have to make. Anyway, I'll send that along. But the response rate is excellent. I just don't want to quote the exact.
And I can't remember what month we looked at that anymore.
So I presented it to the Needham Resilience Network in January, February, March timeframe. So we sent
January,
it to-
February, March, one of those 3 months. That would be why I can't remember exactly which month it happened in either.
I will send it along. Yeah. We are very fortunate with our survey because we've been doing it, except for COVID, since 2008. So we have a lot of trend data.
Does the school department do their own trending and their own?
They just did their most recent survey.
When you say the school,
Schools. They just did their parent survey. Very recent.
And I don't know what questions they have that are targeted to issues like this, but that could be interesting to see. You know, I presume they won't have their data back until the fall probably, but maybe if we can flag it when it does come back to send to this group.
There may be information on the Real Coalition website about at least past surveys.
Right, because this one did just close.
Yeah.
Probably like moments ago, yeah.
So I have a question that I don't know how to answer, but I wanted to for everyone. When you have a town that is majority white,
How, and a lot of people don't understand, they're highly educated or whatever spec, part of society they contribute to. They don't understand that they're part of the problem, right? Because they might not, even I have biases that I don't even know I have, and I work with a lot of. How do you reach the population of the majority to explain that without, because the people that want to learn about it are the ones that continue to participate in the groups that we're surveying and in the groups, but the majority doesn't even know that it's an issue because it doesn't affect them and they don't have any lived experiences. And they're either too busy or they're unaware that their habits or that the way that they lead their lives is what's causing some of the discomfort for the groups that are minorities. How do you alert people that maybe there are unconscious biases or things that are happening that are causing the situation that we are in? And I know this is, if I could stop it, I'm just saying, the people that we're targeting already are trying to get educated in all of this and be a part of the solution. But there's a large group who unintentionally is causing a lot of the situations that we're in town, that they're unaware that they're even part of the problem.
I know
think
that
some of
in our training, so on just a very small scale of the people who work for us. We had basically a full 2-hour session on witness and what it meant, and people really heard it, I think. And people were giving really good examples, and then the follow-up, they talked about how they had thought about it. So that's they weren't necessarily coming because they signed up for the DEI, but it's the training that we did. It's the only training we did all year. In fact, we did all DEI. So,
But you made it a point of doing the training, right? So that you had a target audience that may not have normally have done it, but they're doing it.
And we had authority over those.
And you had
Yes,
authority over
right.
those people. But when you have a town of people that really think that they're progressive, but they're actually the one who's holding back, how do you address, and they don't want to participate in anything because they feel like they're not the problem, right? How do you encourage? And I know there's no answer, right? I mean, that's easy answer, but I think to me, that's the issue. It's the microaggressions. It's the people that really think that they are doing the right thing. They don't understand that it's because it's the way they've always done it. And it's not necessarily intentional, but it's not letting progress occur.
So I was going to say that's a $64 million question. That it's probably a $64 billion question these days, maybe bigger. And I guess what I keep thinking is every time we do something, I keep trying somehow to figure out how the circle gets a little bit wider. And while I hate to think that it's a one starfish at a time problem, throwing them back into the sea, it's feels that way, right? Because getting people's time and attention when they don't think it's something that needs their time and attention is a real challenge. So until it becomes real almost in their life, it's some interaction that gets their attention. It can be a real challenge. It's so painful to watch, but that's what, as we crafted things, like even the cops and community that we did 2 years ago, one of the nice things about that was we did see some people who weren't the regulars who actually came for that. So the circle got a little bit wider, right? How can we create those kinds of things? I think they've had some success with I'm thinking the training, the training for citizens in the summer. What do they call it? That Tina went to, she advertised, you just talked about.
Oh, the Citizens Academy.
The Citizens Academy,
Yeah.
right, training for citizens, Citizens Academy. And the one that they do for kids, hopefully kids could come home and talk to parents about what they might have heard in some of that, but it's just, I hear you, it's incredibly frustrating because everybody, I think, is looking for some magic bullet, and we haven't found it.
Yeah, there it is.
What?
I said it does not exist. I've already just sort of come to the point that's gonna be 35 to 38% of the population that just will not change. And will push back against that change, especially in a town like Needham and most towns in Massachusetts. But I just kind of feel like you have to have bubbles of wokeness, not such a bad word now, but like really bubbles of that. And hopefully as more and more like your bubble here with town and town employees is one bubble. Having some of these safe spaces or some of these groups is another bubble. I think a bubble where we're failing in, I'm not gonna go into the drama, whatever is the school bubble. I think that's probably potentially the biggest bubble to sort of bump amongst all these others. And so I really like the idea that you and Marcus are working on, because I feel like those groups are a very small bubble, but in that bubble, they can find comfort with each other. And it would make it more, I think we had talked about this last time, have sort of events for the Asian community or specific, Latino community, like, so, every 3 or 4 months, Needham, Black community gets together and does that. And then as people start hearing more about that, it's just that bubble to get bigger and push against other good bubbles and eventually start getting to that 33 to 38% when they realize like, oh my gosh, there's all these people doing stuff. And, I'm telling my kid, don't be woke, and make fun of Asians and make fun of Black people, So that's what I'm hoping we can do. It's just
So more grassroots.
more
Basically.
grassroots, and we won't see it in our we won't see it in our lifetime. Our kids will probably see it.
I think a lot
But
of
it should get
being
better.
realistic about what we can change as a society and therefore as a community, or as a community and therefore as a society. And I think the challenge is in speaking to those people to say, you may not have, pardon me, but you may not have the level of awareness or knowledge that you think you have. And until gaining that awareness and knowledge becomes a priority in some measure, whether it's because there's something that happens in their bubble or their circle, or their trusted circle, or it happens in their family, and there's a child who comes from school and says, there's a life lesson here that the family needs to participate in. Or that they realize that allyship is more than a word. And in order to be a true ally, they need to be invested in understanding what the problem is, to understand what the potential solutions are, right? So it's that bubble, it's that neighbor to neighbor, that friend to friend, that peer to peer of saying, this is important and we need to think about this and not just blithely say, I'm in. Because do you know what you're in for? Do you know what you're engaged in and how can you be engaged? And I agree with you, Tonya, that there is a certain part of the population that isn't going to be willing to invest their time and energy and efforts to make adjustments or radical change to their thought processes, their philosophies, and what they want to do. I do think that there's something to be said about people literally grabbing their arm, saying, there's an event on the town common, come with me. Come to Race Amity Day. Bring your kids. Or can I take your kids with mine? There's something to be said about opening the tent, and making sure that you're somehow grabbing them in. And so I think that's where these conversations may perhaps lead to potential concrete steps that the town can do in partnership with, committees, boards, organizations, NBI, all of them. To say, this is how we are wanting to execute our common vision. But Natasha, it's a frustration, but I think it's the human condition.
I agree. I mean, I do a lot of work in the city of Boston where it's mostly minorities and the neighborhoods that with underrepresented communities. So I see it from both sides. So it's interesting to see it, you know, from the other side where I'm the minority in a town. And I have to tell you, I've been here for 22 years, and the biggest barriers that I've faced have been at the schools with the children and the parents. And it's a big part of the population touches the schools. So having the school system, maybe not overtly say it, but like, you know, give lived experiences so that people can be more empathetic, I think would be really helpful as a start.
I think one of the things that troubles me even more about than what you're saying is that for the folks that maybe are choosing not to like go overboard and engage in the programs that are happening all around town because they think they've already got it and they're like doing their part because they're not overtly racist in the world. I think that one of the things that worries me is those people not only shutting themselves off to those other opportunities, but also taking a look at some of the initiatives that are happening, particularly in the schools. That's where I get a lot of stories and feeling like the emphasis that the school is making on DEI initiatives is somehow taking away from the type of education, not the type of education, but like the substantive education that is curriculum. Thank you. Yes, that it's like, well, now we've gone way overboard and now we're focusing so much on this, you know, and so to me, that's where my worry lays, because I think it's like, it's one thing for you just to be kind of like passively not engaged, but I worry about the day when people start to kind of have more vocal opposition to those kind of activities.
I agree. Yeah, I don't do that type of work. I don't, but I think that there are ways where you can basically turn off the population,
Yes.
which is, and my kids felt like, oh my God, there's so much talk about it, but I think it's the right, if you do it in the right way at the right time with the right amount of time, just even like, I don't know. Again, I'm not an educator, so I don't really know how to process it, but if someone, I think to me, the lived experiences are the most important things, because then people can empathize and relate to it, rather than just saying, you have, you know, biases, and well, I mean, that's just in theory, right? But if you say, hey, my kid went to school and someone punched him in the stomach every day for a year, you'd be like, what? Right? I mean, just, I was just reading a friend whose kids are getting bullied and physically hurt on buses. She's Japanese and her husband is Nigerian. And so hearing something like that, I think makes people understand that there's a problem. I'm not saying that's happening in that particular thing happening in Needham, but then people understand that that's why they're concerned, because it gets to the point where you can say the same things over and over again, but if there aren't just specific examples that they can empathize with, it's really hard, you know, to understand and become part of it. But I agree, it can be overly stated so much that then it becomes almost useless.
I'm not saying that I think the schools are overstating it.
I think they are a little bit, but I think it's the strategy of how to approach it might want to be revisited again. I'm not an educator and I don't know how to do it, but I'm just saying there are strategic ways that I think are more impactful than others.
So, you know, what you're talking about are situations that get people's attention because it involves physical health and safety. And I think despite the increasing attention and acknowledgement that there are mental health issues, that people are not realizing that there's an issue such an issue, which is not being paid enough attention to, which is psychological safety. And it's not just mental health, but it's not just, it's psychological safety to be able to be yourself. And, you know, I think that it's not an either or. I think it's an and situation. You know, I think it's a matter of talking about DEI efforts and looking at the curriculum and figuring out how you run it together. And I'll give you an example that hit me upside the head this week. I was speaking to a student of color who was graduated and going to an Ivy League college. And he said to me, we were having a conversation about affirmative action. and he was talking about a paper that he wrote for a senior year. He called it his thesis. And what struck me as incredibly startling is that we're having this conversation about a pretty weighty subject, right? Which is current, that has huge history. And his statement, yeah, you know, as he's explaining this to another student standing there. Yeah, you know, there was some law passed in 1964 that sort of relates to all of this. Like, what, and I said, did you learn about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and what it all meant and what happened in that time period in school? No.
And there lies a big problem.
And therein lies the concern that in teaching DEI the principles and trying to inculcate that into the consciousness and knowledge base for students, somehow it's not getting incorporated into the principle, and it's being seen as an either or situation. And I don't think it needs to be that. It's
That's
part
a
of the
big,
fabric.
big problem. I mean, it's, you're trying to, like the whole thing, if you don't know history, you don't know why you are where you are.
Yeah.
So you can tell kids to be nice and don't be racist and don't do that. But until they realize where it came from, and like, oh, okay, now I understand.
And this is why history repeats
It's
itself.
like, it would be much easier. You wouldn't have to have hours and hours of inclusion talks and diversity talk, because people would be like, oh, I don't want to be like that person. I understand that,
You know, which is why, you know, there are the efforts to pass, you know, some educational reform to teach Asian American history in this country, right? Because something called the Chinese Exclusion Act could have sunk, right? No. I complain about the train horns, but I don't think.
That you
some
say that,
people
I
do.
bet you not one child in that school knows that.
Yeah, you know,
Right.
what I'm saying is that there's got to be a consciousness that is both at home and at school. And then thirdly, at work, where there's an appreciation for the history and the lived experiences. So, you know, I think back to the work we were doing in Newari and looking at the lived experience, you know, those stories are so impactful because they're personal. And I think the desire of these conversations are is to say, what are the issues that can give rise to perhaps fostering some change in whatever to achieve the goal that's been established. And how do we bring people into the tent? How do we bring people into those conversations?
It's more than we can solve.
You know, it's interesting. It's more than we can solve. When this group started, right, we really started focusing on this vision. But we had this list of priorities, and we had like 5 priorities, and the top of the list at the time was the police. There's still work going on with the police, but I feel like they're committed to the work and they're reporting and updating us, and we're hearing what's going on. Number 2 on that list was the schools. And from a Newari perspective, we kind of said hands off because the schools are working on it. But I'm sitting here now thinking, are we doing the right thing? And this is something that maybe we'll have to have a conversation, because we are a whole community. And maybe that is a whole community at the top of the list, and maybe we think about how do we think together for a little bit.
Well, and that was the hope in, you know, having representation from the schools on the line, because it was a huge part of this community. And, you know, look, the education system in Needham and its timelines are one of the reasons people are not part of this. But it's not to just walk away with a diploma from high school, you know, it's having the whole lived experience of an education and childhood. Yeah. And I do think it makes sense to say, you know, the schools are such a big part of the community. They need to be brought into the tent to a larger degree. So,
And it's tricky on how you do it, right? Because you don't want it to sound like you're preaching, you don't, I think, I mean, when I saw a lot of change happen in through the Me Too movement, through the architecture schools, we had, you know, I remember the list of bad architects, they got rid of it because people were freaking out. But And then and then all of a sudden the Me Too movement started, and then all of a sudden the Black Lives Matters happened in 2020 while I was president of the BSA. That allowed us, those lived experiences and that visualization was what allowed us to start race in architecture. Like it gave us agency to do all these things that we normally couldn't do. Because we have been talking about it, but no one could visualize it. No one could really understand it until they actually had an experience that they experienced themselves. And so I felt that the schools in the elementary school to a certain point was more, everybody felt more inclusive because the children were younger, there wasn't as much competition, but it continued, it escalated, and then middle school, it becomes more exclusive, and high school is even worse, right? And there are things that are based on social media. There, I mean, again, I don't know. I design buildings, like I don't know all the pieces of it, but I've watched it with both of my children, and it's they, you know, it's a very difficult process to go through, especially when you don't know any better, right? You were born here, you were raised here, and things escalated to a certain point that became incredibly uncomfortable. And so how do we do it in a way that allows people to understand that we're not trying to preach or trying to, but that there are ways that things could be better, right?
There are ways that things can be better, and there are ways that we can use the benefits that they've achieved in life, whether it's a privilege or a right to make their lives better while at the same time making the community stronger. But it's that realization that they want to do that. You know, I think back 25 years ago when under Mayor Menino, we did the citywide dialogues on racial and ethnic diversity, and I facilitated with Bob Trust, and this is way before he was with ABM, but he and I facilitated the group that included Chinatown, the Leather District, Back Bay, and Beacon Hill. Did we get two more disparate populations in that group? And it was very interesting to me to see who came and who participated in the 6 dialogue sessions. But they were willing to be there. Maybe it was because they were curious. Maybe they were trying to become better citizens. I don't know, but trying to do something, you know, there's just not one answer. There are so many different paths to achieving what level to achieve, but I don't think it can be done at some level.
Do we have any oversight at school? I thought we don't have any oversight with the school.
Well, they're a partner.
Yeah, partner
Collaborate.
here.
Who on Nuari?
What'd you say?
Liz, she's sick.
Because I'm just wondering, you know, they have metrics that they can look at. They can definitely, they have a captive population. They can really do surveys and what their kids are experiencing and follow.
I believe that there are student representatives that sit on the Real Coalition. I can't remember how many, but quite a few. I think they come from the high school and the middle school area. It is interesting that I feel like, to your point, Mary, we kind of like it, like siloed that off in a way, and maybe, you know, I think, you know, the Real Coalition does have like a separate committee that's handling curriculum development and culture in the schools and professional development and the recruiting. They cover a lot of the same places, you know, that you all were talking about during the staff training. I think that the one area that, in my opinion, kind of being part of that organization for a long time is the community engagement piece, has been pretty complicated and not necessarily as effective. A couple of years ago, we were working with Dr. Buchanan in the Human Rights Committee to have like a listening session. I want to say maybe like 2018-ish, 2019-ish. Anyway, what happened was we got everybody together, folks from the Real Coalition kind of reported out what was going on, and then we didn't really have much time for actual conversation or, you know, input from folks, and that was a lot of feedback that we got. And then the pandemic happened, So I think that there's lots of room for improvement and making connections, particularly because as we keep saying that the schools have so many touches out in the community. And that maybe it's just kind of getting more intentional. I think that what we have heard is that they put the information on the website, they put out these reports, there's a newsletter. And then, of course, the problem is that not everybody's, getting their information that way. And particularly if you're having something going on with your child, it may not be the first thing that you're going to figure out. There's no problem solving happening on that website with that data, for example. But that may be a really, I don't know how it happens, because I feel like the school department is such a kind of fortress in itself. But one of the things I think, one of the ways that Newari maybe could impact some of that work is by trying to figure out more avenues for that community feedback, and not just the reporting out, but in the getting information in. So that.
Well, I think it may be that having a more strategic and intentional, a strategic and intentional plan to partner, right? It's not just saying we're gonna partner. I mean, it's, I think about the fact that what we're talking about is sustained work, sustained intentional work. This community comes together and people come up and they step up and they engage when there's a crisis, right? Whether it's Black Lives Matter or George Floyd, whether it is South Asian hate, whether it's, specific incidents that occur in town that, say, oh my God, that could have been me, or that could have happened to somebody I know, right? But it's sustaining work in between these crisis moments, in between these moments of sharp realization that things haven't changed, they haven't progressed. So maybe there needs to be a more strategic plan to the partnership. I was gonna say, I think it's, what I'm hearing, I think is an interesting point. So we did sort of set it aside, and frankly, there's plenty of work in the rest of it, right? We've had plenty to work on and still can carve out the next layer. But it does seem to me, we're not involved as it relates to school culture and the curriculum development, but perhaps the piece around community engagement is a piece that we should think about engaging with jointly, and think about that as a whole community kind of piece, because we're all there. And if it's people talking about their kids, then it's parents who actually live in the community, and there's always going to be other touches. So
The superintendent and I were actually at Babson today talking about having some of their students help us look at different ways for community engagement. So we actually decided to partner on that and this morning. So
that's awesome.
yeah,
And I think what it speaks to is the impressive nature of some of the students we have in town. When I think about the student speakers at the South Asian hate rally from the Common, when I think about the students who have eloquently spoken, some of their lived experiences, it takes a level of courage and guts to do that, but that's sharing the lived experience and broadening their bubble. And shaping their bubble. Because, there's not just living the experience, but there's being a bystander. And then there's being an ally, and then there's being a bystander of a bystander, right? So it's all a matter of how do you bring more people into the conversation. Have the answer. Marcus has his hand up, so I want to give him a chance to jump in.
Am I good? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify earlier. I know I heard something about the Black Lives Movement and being in 2020, but it started far before that, I believe 2013, but I feel like 2020, due to the pandemic, and very unfortunately, but fortunately, that's when we had a lot of white folks that were ready to not only listen to what was going on in the world, but actively engage and being a part of the solution. So I think as unfortunate as everything was that happened in 2020, it potentially started to kick that tire a little harder, and that could potentially be something that would change the course of history with how we're going and what companies, and having white people be at the forefront on some of these issues, and not just talking about they have a friend or heard that this happened to somebody. But when George Floyd was murdered, that was a worldwide, call to action, which probably would not have happened in the way it did without the pandemic. So I just want to clarify that and say, obviously it's been going on for so long, what's been happening, but then also that as well.
And Marcus, you're totally right. What I was saying is that there was like a pivot point at that moment,
Which I'm saying, I'm agreeing with that. Yeah.
awareness, and the same thing for women, right? But there was something at a certain point, there was that pivoted to have opportunity to kind of dive in deeper. And I think that's the thing. And one of the things that I think is really important is strategizing, and how do you speak to adults that are in the majority without offending them or making them feel uncomfortable? How do you talk? How do the kids? Maybe it's the college students that come in and right before they give the college thing say, how do you position it so that it becomes a regular part of the conversation and they're not being preached at? Because my kids would come home and be like, "You're talking about it again." And they saw it as as something that, kind of like enough, like we've heard about it, we know about it, but because there wasn't anything impactful about it, it just felt like it was just another piece of curriculum rather than being strategically or cleverly included so that it was part of the norm of this is how we behave with other people, right? Rather than targeting special people. They didn't want to stand out. So
Hence the history.
I just don't think it'll be the norm until we are uncomfortable with what's going on. So I understand what they're saying, but you can make people comfortable to a certain extent, but it can't be a norm unless people are going to get uncomfortable with something.
But that's the whole point of the history. It's like it takes the blame off of you, and it just makes people realize where this is
Right.
coming from, so that when you mention it, you don't have to keep reheard it again. Because once they hear it once, they'll be like, "Oh, I remember that story."
talked to it last
1980, something this happened, and then this, because it's like, "Oh, I see where this is coming from."
Correct. If you strategically place it in the right places where I don't know how to explain it. And I know, Marcus, what you're saying, like people have to feel uncomfortable. And I tell that to people in my office all the
Education.
time, your turn. But at the same time, when they're kids and again, I wish I knew strategies for making it. But if you make it as part of the curriculum, then it becomes just part of the way that you learn about things and not people pointing fingers at
Because
you.
there's no judgment. If
Exactly.
you can create an environment where it's a no judgment zone, where this is not a blame game, where this is how do we be
Information.
better, right? It's the context of creating that true learning environment where it's not, I'm gonna teach you a lesson. No. It's how do we understand and learn? Well, and it's the whole human to human thing, right? So I keep there's a Ted Lasso in the 3rd episode talking about Colin when he's gay, right? We can't not care. We can't not care, right? So it's not enough to say, "Oh, I don't care about that. It's not important to me." The answer is you can't not care. So how do we collectively help people to can't not care so they're tuned in enough? I do think history is a huge part of it because we're all a product of that, and we didn't get here out of nowhere, right? Well, and it's setting aside apathy, right? And it's setting aside some despair that there's any hope of making change. And it's setting aside any reactions of, "Oh, thank God it would never happen to me." Right, when there's an incident that occurs elsewhere in the country. Well, maybe not on a macro level, but maybe on a micro level, I mean, it's just, and I don't know. Maybe just not today. Or maybe not just today, and maybe not just to you. Yeah. This is a really important conversation. and I hate to do a time check, but I am gonna like do a time check because we do have a third item that relates to talking about a recommended training plan for boards and committees, so I don't want to totally lose that, so I just
I
want
think
to.
it might go right in, right? There's some way to create
It's related because
board
that
and
was one,
committee curriculum that involved open meeting law and public records that somehow also had stories of people's lived experiences. Yeah, that's an interesting.
And we're trying to figure, I mean, everyone's been so busy, but let's say, for example, the planning board. We've been talking about finding ways, and Marianne has been really great. Like sometimes we have interviews and you stand up and you say, well, what is the composition of your team and all of that? A lot of the public work and all of the higher ed work that I do, there are quotas for a certain amount of percentages of women, minority, disadvantaged, veterans. And Needham doesn't have it, but DCAM, the state has it. So I mean, it's the same thing as sustainability, right? Like there's certain, it's already been done by many, many towns and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So it's implementing some of these things as a check, right? Like,
and the fact is, because DCAM has it, if you make it a value, you can do better than that.
exactly.
So that's the real question.
And the same thing for the construction projects for PPBC that I've, I went to talk to them and I think we need to have another discussion and say, DCAM does it. This is what they have. Massport does it. There's the Massport example. There's the, MassDOT. There's this, like everybody's doing it. It's the norm. People expect it. People that do municipal work expect it. And I think we should set standards for these things. So, and boards, right? So the composition of boards. So I brought it up to the planning board that whenever we appoint people, we need to put it out there and let other people have a chance. And if the person that's there is the best qualified, they'll come back, right? I mean, but we need to put things out there and intentionally look for people that can diversify boards. And because I did it right before it happened and, that had never been done, we waited till the next time, we warned the person because they were offended that they weren't going to be appointed again since 1983 or whatever it was. And so then I said, okay, well, the next time, I understand that people are sorry now, but let's say it at the next meeting saying, every time we appoint, we want to make sure that there's competition and that there are several candidates to see who the best candidate is based on the current composition of the board. Doesn't mean that everyone isn't qualified. It means that we want to make sure that we represent in the best way possible, not only with expertise, but also in gender, race, ethnicity, like just to have a board that has a lot of different perspectives. And so working on that, but I feel that if the town itself kind of has some guidelines of goals for the boards that don't have any diversity and don't, again, unintentionally feel like they don't need any diversity because they're running fine, right? Then it sets goals for all of these boards to start thinking about their composition, especially appointed.
So I do think that's something, I know I've been through that. Marcus has been through that. That's something that have been looking at quite intentionally now for several years and will continue on. But I think it's worthwhile for all boards to be thinking about and trying to figure out, again, how do you widen the circle, pull in some new people?
Because that's another way of education, right? So then all of a sudden you've never met a Puerto Rican woman and you're like, oh, she's like everyone else, right? Or you have, I mean, I know this sounds ridiculous,
No.
but if Dora's the only example you have in your life, then, and because I mean, it's just, you have to make it, I'm horrifying Marcus here, but it's about just like understanding that everyone is the same. They all have the same feelings there.
But that's the accountability piece. I mean, I think much as we're trying to make sure the town is accountable, we need to make sure the boards and committees and all the organizations are accountable. Because to say that they're in support of your vision is more than checking the box. There's got to be an intentionality of action.
Well, some of them didn't even want to check the box because they didn't know what they were getting into. Right? So that's another issue altogether, right? But
look, I mean, this is
it's a work in progress, right? I mean, a work in progress where tonight we're saying we need more engagement with the school. That's not something we might have identified previously.
Well, we were prioritizing, and now I feel like, and I do have to say kudos to all of you, like, there's been a lot of movement on the police, on the staff, and so this is kind of the next layer. And
It's taken a village.
Mhm.
Grateful to everybody at the table and everybody who's
nudging
tonight too.
things to move along, but now we're in a point where that is moving. And then we have other things that we feel have not been addressed yet, right? So it's kind of layering.
But it's also trying to find ways to refine, I mean, well, it takes a village. We were from remote villages when we started UR. And to see it coalesce into something so meaningful, I think has been very rewarding for each of us. So much so that we're going to continue this work. But I think it's a matter of saying, okay, signed up and you said you RSVP that you're coming to the party. So now tell me what you're bringing to the pot. You know, I mean, it's needing people to say, you can't just stop.
Do you think? Sorry.
No, and I worry that people have stopped.
Yeah. I agree. Do you think that, as maybe like in thinking about the training for boards and committees, as like a precursor to that, having an opportunity for learning some of that history piece of it, like I think I'm thinking back to when we were planning the conversations around policing. We were trying to be very intentional, like laying out some facts, to give some context for the conversation that we were having. And I wonder if, we could work with community ed or something to put together, a couple sessions of some like important US history to kind of set the table so that people understand what US history has to do with local government and like what the point of trying to make more diverse boards or trying to understand what a microaggression is or like why we even care about that. And that like this might be an opportunity, it obviously can't be too cumbersome that people won't be able to do it, but maybe if you're inviting all of these, I'm assuming like pretty well-networked people in the community to come and have some of that context learning before we jump into kind of the more nitty-gritty. What does it mean to diversify kind of
So everybody's
conversation?
starting from the same page.
Yes, and maybe like, I don't know. As a white woman who went through the public education system in Massachusetts, many years ago now, it really wasn't until I was probably like 40 before I really started to learn things that made me feel like, holy cow, how did I not know this? And that's what like made me decide I need to do something, right? And so I feel like for the folks around the edges that we're trying to figure out how to get them engaged, I don't know, maybe it's too Pollyannish to think if you knew, like once you know better, you do better. But
Well, I don't think you're off base on that, Jen, because I'm thinking about the police sessions, the community sessions. And when the history of Needham police was presented, I think it was an eye opener to a lot of the people in that room. To hear what Needham used to do, right? And it gave context.
But you got them, how do you get the people to participate,
I
right?
just wrote down.
How do you get them to
You start with the
participate?
boards and committees.
How do you get them to?
You start with the boards and committees.
How do you get them to?
You have
But
to go to
see,
that, you have to go to them.
You have to go to them and you have to let them know why it's happening. To let them know the context of it happening within the new RE goals.
And to understand that it is part and parcel of their being a member of this board of community. And you need a professional to help strategize on how to speak to these boards, because Mary Ann and I went to a board and they were resisting, right? And they didn't, they pretended or that they didn't understand. So if somebody can have a strategy to speak to people without them really knowing how they're being able to be more open.
You get somebody who's a community member who's going to be able to be ready to share lived experience about why it's relevant. They need the relevance factor. They need the relevance factor.
And for the schools, you know, we're all so busy, and I remember in middle school, they had a lot of sessions on parenting and social media. That's where you get the parents to come in, that, and then within it, you strategize again to add something to it that adds to this. But you need to get the mainstream to come in, to be interested in something, and then figure out how to speak about other things to, you know, enlighten them about.
But
other-
every school has a PTC, right?
I know, but I'm telling you, as a parent, super busy, I would show up to certain things that I knew.
How to
would
keep your kids safe from
in how to keep my kids safe. And in the how to keep my kids safe, I learned a ton. And I think that if somebody would have said, this is what's happening in town, things that you don't know about, that you would be horrified or whatever, you know, or I'm just alerting you the things that have been happening recently that, yeah, I would have probably stayed longer to hear about it. Right, and so it's how do you figure, you know, which opportunities are there in town for a lot of people to attend, because there's an interest that this also becomes part of the conversation.
So maybe there's a
I
way
don't know.
for, you know, if we're talking about engaging the schools and the community in that fashion, maybe there's a way for the schools to identify how to reach those parents. Like, if I told you that we were holding a session, would you come? If no, why not?
With the little time that I
What
have,
would your motivation, what would entice you to come? What would incent?
it would be in addition to something that is something I don't know anything about, like social media and teenagers and blah, 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 and, you know, and racism, like, or something, you know, or something to that effect, where I would want to learn how to keep my kids safe and also learn what they might be doing that is impacting other people negatively. And so it has to be kind of, if it's isolated, it will only attract the same people that have been going on the website to look at it. Or it has to be something where you kind of, it's like what happened with the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, like all of a sudden, everyone saw it on TV. And everyone was horrified, even though it's been happening forever, you know? But why did this specific, what's the tipping point of that? What is the tipping point of getting people to understand?
Would you come to a session about your role in creating a culture of psychological safety for your student, child, and peers?
I would.
I mean, you know, it's, I mean, developing a program that meets the goals while at the same time as having, enticing people to come because they're interested in the subject matter.
And how do you translate that into the zoning board of appeals?
That's different. I'm talking about the
No,
schools.
I totally understand, but the goal here was
Committees.
board and committee training. So how do we create
I
something
think
that I could sneak foundation setting
Because-
in and?
I mean, don't you think like a instructional piece on redlining, like would be still relevant to that
The
discussion?
Not in my backyard.
Yeah,
What
they
is
don't,
that?
it doesn't, unless I stood up, right? Which is the
Well,
reason why I'm
that's
on here.
Pressure's off of you.
Unless I stood up or someone else stood up and said, you know, whatever, I experienced this and these are peers that respect you. You can tell them anything. It's like when people tell stories about World War II, like I am super empathetic, but I don't have a lived experience. I don't have anyone in my family that's immediately affected by, so I feel terrible, but I don't know if I would make change when there are other issues that I'm dealing with that maybe for, let's say, I'm just using that as an example, but in my life, might warrant more of my attention at that moment. So most people are so overwhelmed with their own lives, I think, that they can only handle the things that are within the spectrum of, that can help them or their families be safe, let's say. So if it doesn't impact you,
Right,
you have to, it has to be introduced into your life in a different way
so it needs to be relevant to the people.
to the people who are in the room.
Would you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you think that individual, like if the select board asked the members that they appoint or to appointed boards and asked them personally to attend a session, I really would like you to go. I mean, is that, or if you were to ask your colleagues on your board, your board, it said, here's my lived experience, will you go to this session? You think you'd get more people? Is that a strategy?
I think, you have a captive audience. Every board meets, but you have a captive audience there. And if you say, can you give me 15 minutes to talk about something that I think is important? They would listen and they would say, but
Well, to be fair, though, some of them might do the same thing as we had happen, right? In which case they're.
yeah, we don't
going
have a
to-
problem. Why do we need to change?
Yeah, well, I do think that there's some opportunities to think about what are the venues that most citizens gather at? And how can we think about inserting something there? I think it's to do that intentionally, because we may find there are more ways we can do something than not, if we try to figure out what can we piggyback on and what can the whole be.
And hire someone that for those specific, can be strategic about what you say and how you say it, so that it doesn't feel like people are preaching, right? It's the same thing. We deal with this sustainability all the time. Right?
Yeah.
And eventually now it's part of the norm because the municipalities in the state have created laws. So now all the developers have to do it. And you don't have to convince people because they have to meet the criteria. So that's why the Massport example is really great, because they already say you need to meet this criteria of whatever it is, 12–18% women and minorities. And that's just a given. So if you want to compete and you want this project, all the developers, that's just the basis of foundation of even trying to apply.
It's the ones in.
Kate, I also wonder the question about, as we appoint each year, can we say, before you serve, we need you to do this? Is there a course that we put together for all new appointees for the year at some point? Did we think about that?
That part of the onboarding.
It's just
That's,
part of the.
that's
onboarding.
brilliant, because what are they gonna say? No, I don't want to be part of that board because I'm not gonna spend 30 minutes or an hour doing a seminar.
I mean, you'd have to have it recorded, because we're appointing a couple of people every meeting between now and.
Yeah, but we could do something at the beginning of September or something.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna
mean,
be part of this
It's just-
board,
It's worth
No,
consideration.
it's totally.
Yeah,
it's not a big lift for you to attend this thing, we want everyone to, and it's board
It's an
training.
orientation.
It's
Yeah.
orientation.
So you can have public
It's
records and open
onboarding.
meeting and.
yeah.
It's onboarding. And it's part of their understanding their duties and responsibilities as government.
Because when you go on your own, Marianne and I know, people think it's a political thing, that you're coming in for politics. And it is so infuriating, but so
That's the confusion between having a civic matter and having a political matter. Because just a lack of understanding about.
so that's why I'm saying, I think if it's intentional and in the right way, with the right audience, you're gonna have more impact. And again, I don't know the answers to this, but I do know that if you create a seminar for a Saturday for 2 hours, you're gonna get the same people that are super interested to attend. We're trying to get those people, but also this other end of the spectrum that has no clue that they're the ones that may be causing some of the situations that we're in today, because it's just society, it's the structure that we've had.
I think this is. You have an orientation and you can talk
And
about
it's not-
redlining or, the history of local governors.
And it's not a DEI orientation.
No,
it's
no, just
saying-
an orientation.
It's just called orientation,
Right.
and that's part of orientation, because it is.
My colleagues call it the pill and peanut butter. So that's what a lot of people are doing. You know what? I don't have dog, but I guess you give dog pills and peanut butter.
For
So-
cheese.
yeah. So, a lot of the training you have to go.
It just becomes part of the norm. It's like, this is not acceptable in our town, and that's why we want to make sure that everyone's on the same.
You know. With the pill and peanut butter or cheese thing. You also want to be transparent about why you're doing it. This is a town initiative. This is a commitment that the community has made. You are going to be on a board and town committee, and you need to be recognizing that this is part of the framework for the work that you're going to be doing.
But it's part of the norm, so it's like there's ethics, there's, you know, there's inclusion, there's whatever, I mean, it's all kind of onboarding, and everybody is equal.
Yeah.
Everybody, no matter who you are, this is the onboarding, and this is part of it, and so it's not highlighting some and not others. It's not saying, hey, you need, but it's more like, hey, this is what we do for everyone.
And you are gonna get a big cross section. Maybe we get some of the bubbles.
Yeah.
I'd like to just make a plug to, again, and maybe you're already thinking this, but to include some just like plain old context setting history, because I think that when we focus on telling stories of people's lived experiences, they're powerful. And also it lets people think, like, well, I wouldn't have done that, so I'm not worried and I don't need to pay attention anymore. But when I think that Toyin said this, like when you're talking about history, you take the personal piece out of it and people.
Right.
The history of what government has done.
Right.
Yes.
And why we care about trying to do differently.
Why we don't want. to.
Right.
Right.
I like-
I know Kate didn't want any new initiatives this year.
No, this is all your,
But this
it's already
is
on your
all-
goals. It's already on there.
So we now have a framework for it.
No,
So
I think
it's
that
a
makes a lot
really
of sense.
productive discussion. Heidi.
I think this is about communication, so I think it's not, I think it's how do we communicate and how do we engage? And just kind of throwing stuff out there to see if there's a broader net that we can put out there.
And again, sometimes focusing on who we can reach and control, right, is like you said, the police and the staff, but the people that you all appoint. And who are elected, if it's a norm, the elected people will come.
Right. And it's a continued effort to bring intentionality, right, to all these different pieces of our work. So,
Where did town meeting members fit to this landscape?
Because that's a big group of people that could.
Then on the second.
Next one.
yeah, because there's somebody else to get to town meeting, we have to go through the moderator.
And you know the other thing is, I know that there's a group of religious leaders in town.
Yeah.
And that's another group that has a big, broad,
All of the groups, I mean, they send that to me.
but is there something that do they have a cheat sheet of things that can help them? Or, I don't know, just, I mean, they talk to a lot of people, so having
Maybe
them
Maybe they can,
message.
maybe they can collaborate on a common surname for the week.
Who's that? Sorry.
The interview.
Or just, yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm just throwing it, that they have big groups of people that listen to, you know.
I think back to, Toyan's 35%, the reality is that it's understanding the group that you're speaking to and saying, how do we make this relevant?
Right.
For them? And that's where this strategy comes. It's how do you make it relevant? Is because they're appointed or have to understand that this is what Needham wants. This is what the community wants.
It's a commitment.
It's a commitment, it's part of their duties. And the challenge is transferring that to the general community member who doesn't think it's right. It's not a priority. They don't care. It's not important to them. They don't want to make the investment. and it's understanding that they're not the first group you're trying to reach.
We have hundreds and hundreds of committee members. So we start.
There's no reason they can't become the ambassadors of whatever you're trying to accomplish. That's why we have a representative government. It's not just the town meeting.
The town meeting is not that diverse.
Well, no, so we were really focused on the boards and committees.
But we put town meeting down now for after.
Yeah. Boards and
Figure,
committees
well,
first.
understanding that a lot of board and committee members
Are
are
on
like
town
town meeting members too.
They are, they are.
You know, there's increasingly less overlap all the time because we continue to work at broadening the pool of who's coming to those boards and committees and
But
finding lots of new people in town, and I'm glad that they're stepping up. So,
and there's a generational shift in times.
which is a big part of it also.
Although you know who comes to all the events? It's the folks that hang out at the senior center, so.
Yeah.
It's a pretty solid. And very engaged.
One of the things about Needham though is that they're the older generation of their families who also live in. So, let them do some of the speaking. Right?
So if we can wrap up, I think here, I want to thank everybody for 8 o'clock, here we are. For giving us their time tonight and coming to have this discussion. We had committed that we were going to do this, as I say, at least once a year, so this is our check-in, but Kate and I and subsequent chairs after me will continue to try to figure out, and ping the group when we think there's something that might be of interest to you on the select board agenda. And I think you've given us some pieces to work on tonight, so we'll report back to people certainly long before next year on some things to see if there's some things that we can get moving here. Select board will be going through goals again in August at our retreat. I'll look forward to reporting back what we've adopted for next year as we continue to widen our circle. So thank you to everybody for helping to widen that circle.
Thank you for being so dedicated to it, really, because we could have lost steam. And I was so pleased to see that we were meeting today, so.
I'll pick the June date for next year soon. Marion always says, if it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist.
Yes. There we go. All right, I could welcome a motion that the meeting be adjourned.
So moved.
Second.
Aye. Marcus, do you want to give us an eye?
Bye.
All right, see you tomorrow. Bye. Good night.